to understand the current crisis between Iran and the United States. The strikes, the protests, the nuclear brinkmanship, and the threats of war. One must travel back to 1953. At that time, Iran was not an enemy of the West, but rather a strategic ally, prized for its vast oil reserves and its position along the Soviet Union's southern flank. The democratically elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh had made a decision that would reverberate through decades. He nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, taking control of Iranian oil from British hands. This move infuriated London, and with the Cold War intensifying, Washington grew concerned that Mossadegh's nationalism might open the door to Soviet influence. The result was Operation Ajax's CIA-led coup that overthrew Mossadegh and reinstalled the monarch, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, as the undisputed ruler of Iran. For many Iranians, this moment marked the beginning of American interference in their nation's affairs, a wound that has never fully healed. In the years following the coup, the United States became the Shah's most important patron. Iran was seen as a pillar of stability in a volatile region, a gendarmerie protecting American interests in the Persian Gulf. The relationship deepened with arms sales, economic aid, and even nuclear cooperation. In 1957, under President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace program, the United States signed a civilian nuclear cooperation agreement with Iran. A decade later, Washington provided Tehran with a 5-megawatt nuclear research reactor, along with the enriched uranium fuel needed to operate it. This early partnership, which continued through the 1960s and into the 1970s, is a historical irony not lost on contemporary observers. The very technology that now stands at the center of UC-Iran tension's uranium enrichment, nuclear facilities, the capacity for atomic energy, was initially introduced to Iran with American approval and assistance. The United States helped build the foundation upon which Iran's nuclear program now stands. By the 1970s, the Shah had transformed Iran into a major military power, funded by skyrocketing oil revenues. President Richard Nixon offered the Shah a blank check to purchase American weapons, agreeing to sell him virtually any non-nuclear system in the U.S. arsenal. Billions of dollars flowed into Iranian military modernization. On the surface, Iran appeared to be advancing rapidly. Skyscrapers rose in Tehran, universities expanded, and the country embraced a vision of secular, Western-oriented modernity. But beneath this glittering surface, resentment was building. The Shah's rule grew increasingly autocratic. His secret police, SAVAK, became notorious for torture and repression. Religious leaders, led by the exiled Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, denounced the Shah as a puppet of the West. Traditional merchants in the bazaars chafed against economic policies that favored large Western corporations. By 1978, these accumulated grievances had ignited a revolutionary firestorm that would consume the monarchy and forever alter Iran's relationship with the United States. The revolution came with breathtaking speed. Throughout 1978, protests grew larger and more confrontational. Security forces fired on crowds, killing thousands, but the demonstrations only swelled. In January 1979, with his grip on power collapsing, the Shah and his family fled Tehran. He departed as a man without a country, traveling first to Egypt, then Morocco, the Bahamas, and Mexico, a monarch in exile, unwelcome almost everywhere. On February 1st, Ayatollah Khomeini returned from 14 years of exile, touching down in Tehran to the ecstatic welcome of millions. Within weeks, his followers had seized control of the government, and in December, a referendum established the Islamic Republic of Iran. This was a new kind of state, governed according to Shia Islamic principles, with Khomeini installed as supreme leader. The revolutionaries made no secret of their hostility toward the United States. They called America the Great Satan, the primary source of corruption and oppression in the Muslim world. The decades of friendship were over. The rupture became absolute on November 4, 1979. A group of Iranian students, calling themselves Muslim student followers of the Imam's line, stormed the United States Embassy in Tehran. They captured 66 American diplomats and civilian personnel, demanding that the United States return the Shah, who had recently been admitted to a New York hospital for cancer treatment, to face justice in Iran. The hostage-takers believed they were defending the revolution against another CIA plot, another American intervention. They held 52 Americans captive for 444 days, subjecting them to isolation, mock executions, and psychological torment. President Jimmy Carter authorized a military rescue mission in April 1980, but the operation ended in disaster. Mechanical failures and a sandstorm caused a helicopter to crash into a transport aircraft in the Iranian desert, killing 8 American servicemen. The failed rescue deepened American humiliation and cemented the hostage crisis as a defining trauma in U.S.-Iran relations. The hostages were finally released on January 20, 1981, the very day Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as president. Their release came under the Algiers Accords, a negotiated settlement in which the United States agreed to unfreeze Iranian assets and pledged non-interference in Iran's internal affairs. The timing, whether coincidence or design, created a lasting suspicion in Tehran that Reagan's campaign had secretly colluded with Iran to delay the release until after the election. This suspicion would later resurface in the Iran-Contra affair. For the American public, the hostage crisis was an indelible humiliation. Nightly news broadcasts had counted the days of captivity. Yellow ribbons became symbols of a nation waiting and powerless. For Iran, the hostage-taking was celebrated as a revolutionary triumph, proof that even the world's superpower could be defied. The two nations emerged from the crisis with no diplomatic relations, no trust, and a mutual enmity that has proven remarkably durable through 4 decades and 10 American presidents. Within months of the hostage release, Iran faced a new existential threat. In September 1980, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein, seeing revolutionary chaos as an opportunity, launched a full-scale invasion of Iran. The war that followed lasted 8 years, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives and leaving both countries devastated. The United States, viewing Iran as the greater threat, tilted decisively toward Iraq. Washington provided Saddam with intelligence, satellite photos, dual-use technology, and even agricultural credits that Saddam diverted to weapons purchases. When Iraq used chemical weapons against Iranian troops and Kurdish civilians, the Reagan administration looked the other way and, at times, actively blocked international condemnation. For Iran, American support for Saddam was proof of profound hostility. The United States was not merely opposed to the Islamic Republic, but willing to back a brutal dictator who used poison gas against Iranian soldiers. The war's end in 1988 brought no peace with Washington, only the memory of American complicity in Iraq's aggression. On July 3, 1988, in the final months of the Iran-Iraq War, a United States Navy warship, committed an act that would become another enduring wound. The USS Vincennes, a guided missile cruiser operating in the Persian Gulf, shot down Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian airliner on a routine commercial flight from Bandar Abbas to Dubai. All 290 passengers and crew perished, including 66 children. The Vincennes was in Iranian waters at the time, and its crew mistakenly identified the Airbus A300 as an attacking F-14 Tomcat. The United States expressed regret, but never formally apologized or accepted criminal responsibility. It did eventually pay compensation to the families $61.8 million in an out-of-court settlement. For Iran, the downing of Flight 655 was no accident. It was murder, an intentional act of American aggression. The incident remains a raw nerve, cited by Iranian officials to this day as evidence of American disregard for Iranian lives. Coming so soon after the horrors of the war with Iraq, it reinforced the narrative of a world arrayed against the Islamic Republic. The 1990s brought a partial thaw, though no real reconciliation. President Hashemi Rafsanjani pursued pragmatic reconstruction after the devastating war with Iraq, and European countries began rebuilding economic ties with Tehran. But the United States held firm. In 1995 and 1996, President Bill Clinton signed executive orders imposing comprehensive sanctions on Iran, prohibiting American companies from doing business there. The sanctions threatened penalties against foreign firms that invested in Iran's energy sector. The official justification cited Iran's nuclear program, its opposition to the Arab-Israeli peace process, and its support for groups the U.S. designated as terrorist organizations, including Hezbollah and Hamas. Inside Iran, the slogans remained "Death to America" continued to echo at Friday prayers, and anti-American murals decorated Tehran's walls. But beneath the rhetoric, Iranian officials quietly signaled interest in dialogue. The signals were not returned. Washington maintained its policy of containment, waiting for the Islamic Republic to collapse or moderate. It did neither. The September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States created a brief, unexpected opportunity for cooperation. Iran, which had been fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan throughout the 1990s, shared an enemy with Washington. In the aftermath of 9/11, Iran offered assistance. It provided intelligence on Taliban positions, facilitated the passage of supplies, and even helped rescue American airmen who had been forced down in Iranian territory. For a fleeting moment, diplomats from both countries met in Geneva to discuss Afghanistan's future, and reformist President Mohammad Khatami spoke of a dialogue of civilizations. But the opportunity passed. In his January 2002 State of the Union address, President George W. Bush declared Iran part of an axis of evil alongside Iraq and North Korea, accusing Tehran of seeking weapons of mass destruction and exporting terror. Iranian reformers were humiliated and discredited. Hardliners who had always warned that America could not be trusted felt vindicated. The moment for rapprochement was lost. Later in 2002, an Iranian opposition group revealed the existence of nuclear facilities that Tehran had not declared to the International Atomic Energy Agency. These included a uranium enrichment plant at Natanz and a heavy water reactor at Arak. The disclosures triggered a diplomatic crisis. Iran insisted its program was peaceful, intended solely for energy production. But the secrecy of the facilities combined with Iran's history of evading inspections, fueled Western suspicions that the program had military dimensions. Negotiations between Iran and 3 European countries, Britain, France, and Germany, produced temporary suspensions of enrichment activity, but no lasting resolution. In 2005, with hardliner Mohammad Mossadegh newly elected as president, Iran broke the seals at Natanz and resumed enrichment. The IAEA referred Iran's file to the UN Security Council, and a cycle began that continues to this day. This cycle includes Iranian progress and enrichment, international demands for suspension, threats of sanctions, threats of military action, and occasional brief windows of diplomacy. By the late 2000s, the confrontation had moved into new domains. The United States and Israel, unwilling to launch open military strikes, turned to covert action. The most sophisticated known operation was Stuxnet, a cyber weapon jointly developed by American and Israeli intelligence. Designed specifically to target the centrifuges at Natanz, Stuxnet caused them to spin at destructive speeds while feeding normal readings to monitoring systems. It reportedly destroyed approximately 1/5 of Iran's centrifuges, setting the nuclear program back by months or years. The attack, revealed publicly in 2010, demonstrated that the United States was engaged in a quiet war against Iran's nuclear infrastructure, even as diplomats continued to talk. It also taught Iran valuable lessons about the vulnerabilities of its systems and the determination of its adversaries. Iranian engineers rebuilt, hardened their defenses, and pressed forward. By 2012, the program had recovered and expanded, and Iran began enriching uranium to 20% purity. This level, while still short of weapons grade, significantly reduced the time needed for any potential breakout. The election of Hassan Rouhani as Iran's president in 2013 opened a new diplomatic channel. Rouhani, a relative moderate, had campaigned on a promise to improve relations with the world and secure relief from crippling economic sanctions. In September 2013, he received a phone call from President Barack Obama, the first direct conversation between an American and Iranian leader since the 1979 revolution. The call lasted 15 minutes, but its symbolism was immense. Over the following months, intense negotiations produced an interim agreement. By July 2015, after 2 years of talks, Iran and the P5+1, the United States, Britain, France, Russia, China, and Germany announced the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. The JCPOA, as it became known, was the most ambitious arms control agreement in decades. Iran accepted strict limits on its enrichment capacity, reduced its stockpile of enriched uranium, and submitted to enhanced international inspections. In exchange, the United States and its partners would lift nuclear-related sanctions, unfreezing billions in Iranian assets. This allowed Iran to rejoin the global economy. Under the terms of the 2015 nuclear deal, Iran committed to reducing its centrifuges by 2/3. It agreed to keep enrichment at 3.67%, purity well below weapons grade, and limit its enriched uranium stockpile to just 300 kilograms. The heavy water reactor at Arak was redesigned to minimize plutonium production. International inspectors gained unprecedented access to Iranian facilities, including military sites under certain circumstances. Iran reaffirmed repeatedly and officially that it would never seek nuclear weapons. For the Obama administration and America's European allies, the JCPOA represented a historic achievement. It was a peaceful resolution to a crisis that could otherwise lead to war. The International Atomic Energy Agency repeatedly certified that Iran was complying with its commitments. Sanctions relief brought tangible benefits to the Iranian economy, and for a brief period, it seemed possible that the deal might open the door to broader cooperation. But the agreement had powerful enemies on both sides. In the United States, Republicans denounced it as a dangerous concession to a terrorist regime. In Iran, hardliners warned that America could not be trusted to keep its word. Both would soon be proven right. The 2016 election of Donald Trump fundamentally altered the JCPOA's prospects. Trump had campaigned against the nuclear deal, calling it the worst deal ever negotiated, and promising to tear it up. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a fierce opponent of the agreement, lobbied Trump relentlessly to abandon it. For 2 years, Trump's national security team debated the issue. Some advisors argued that staying in the deal, while pressing for a stronger follow-on agreement, would better serve American interests. But in May 2018, Trump overruled them. He announced that the United States was withdrawing from the JCPOA and reinstating all sanctions that had been lifted under the agreement. He added additional maximum pressure sanctions designed to strangle Iran's economy. European allies who remained in the deal pleaded with Washington to reconsider. They tried to create financial mechanisms to circumvent American sanctions. But the power of the U.S. financial system made those efforts largely ineffective. Iran's economy plunged into deep recession, and the Iranian rial lost more than half its value. The maximum pressure campaign inflicted severe hardship on ordinary Iranians. Inflation soared past 40%. Unemployment rose, particularly among young people. Medicines and medical equipment, though theoretically exempt from sanctions, became harder to import as banks refused to process transactions. The economic pain fueled protests across the country, in Tehran, in the provincial cities, in the oil-rich Southwest, and the ethnic minority regions. Demonstrators chanted not only economic slogans, but increasingly political ones. Death to the dictator. Not Gaza, not Lebanon, my life for Iran. The regime responded with force. Security forces and plainclothes militiamen dispersed crowds, made mass arrests, and, according to human rights groups, killed hundreds of protesters. For the Trump administration, the protests validated the strategy. They believed that maximum pressure would eventually force the Iranian people to rise up and overthrow their government. But the regime survived, and its leaders, convinced that America sought not a better deal, but outright collapse, hardened their positions. The door to diplomacy, already narrow, swung shut. On January 3, 2020, the shadow war between the United States and Iran burst into the open. An American drone operating over Baghdad International Airport fired missiles at a convoy leaving the airport. The target was Qasem Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Soleimani was no ordinary general. He was the architect of Iran's regional strategy, the mastermind behind its network of allied militias, and widely considered the second most powerful person in Iran after the supreme leader himself. He had directed operations against American forces in Iraq, supplying militias with deadly roadside bombs. He had built Hezbollah into Lebanon's most powerful military force. He had kept the Assad regime alive in Syria. The Trump administration justified the assassination by claiming Soleimani was plotting imminent attacks against American personnel, a claim it never publicly substantiated. Iran responded with ballistic missile strikes on 2 Iraqi bases housing American troops, wounding more than 100 service members. Both sides then stood down, but the escalation had dramatically raised the stakes. Assassinating a foreign general was an act of war, and Tehran now had even more reason to distrust American intentions. When Joe Biden took office in January 2021, he promised to return the United States to the nuclear deal if Iran returned to compliance, but the path proved tortuous. Iran, having watched the United States violate its commitments once, demanded guarantees that no future president could withdraw again, a guarantee Biden could not constitutionally provide. Indirect talks in Vienna dragged on for more than a year, with Iranian negotiators insisting that all sanctions imposed after 2017 must be lifted and verified before Iran would reverse its nuclear advances. Meanwhile, Iran had not stood still. In response to the American withdrawal and Soleimani's assassination, Tehran had gradually breached the JCPOA's limits. By 2021, it was enriching uranium to 20%, then to 60%, just a short technical step from weapons grade. It installed advanced centrifuges far more efficient than those permitted under the deal. It restricted IAEA inspections, limiting the agency's ability to monitor its activities. By early 2022, the Vienna talks had reached an impasse, and by 2023, the prospect of reviving the JCPOA was effectively dead. The agreement that had taken years to negotiate lay in ruins. The crisis expanded dramatically on October 7, 2023, when Hamas militants from Gaza launched a devastating attack on Israel. They killed approximately 1,200 people and took more than 240 hostages. Israel's retaliatory war in Gaza, which continued for months, drew in Iran's regional proxies. Hezbollah in Lebanon began firing rockets into northern Israel on a near-daily basis, forcing tens of thousands of Israelis to evacuate their homes. The Houthis in Yemen, armed and supplied by Iran, launched missiles and drones at commercial shipping in the Red Sea, disrupting global trade. Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria attacked American bases, wounding U.S. personnel. For the first time, Israel and Iran engaged in direct strikes against each other's territory. Israel reportedly attacked Iranian facilities, and Iran launched a massive missile and drone barrage at Israel in April 2024. The region teetered on the edge of all-out war. By mid-2024, with the conflict in Gaza unresolved and tensions across the Middle East at their highest in decades, the stage was set for the next act in the long U.S.-Iran confrontation. Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, and with him returned maximum pressure, but this time with an added edge. The new administration moved quickly to reimpose the full weight of sanctions. They added new designations targeting Iran's shadow fleet of tankers and its procurement networks. But Trump also took a step his first-term self had not. He wrote directly to Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, offering a 2-month deadline for a new nuclear deal. The letter was delivered in March 2025, and it reportedly offered negotiations without preconditions. It warned that if no agreement was reached, the consequences would be severe. Khamenei's response was dismissive. He had no interest in negotiating with a president who had already demonstrated that American commitments meant nothing. They are not seeking a negotiation. They are seeking to impose their demands, Khamenei said in a speech rejecting the overture. But diplomatic channels, mediated by Oman and others, remained open. By April, Iranian and American negotiators were meeting indirectly in Muscat, exploring whether any common ground existed. The diplomacy collapsed in fire on June 22, 2025, with indirect talks ongoing and expectations of a sixth round of negotiations. Israel launched a large-scale air attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. The strike targeted the three principal sites: Natanz, where thousands of centrifuges enriched uranium; Fordo, the facility buried deep inside a mountain; and Isfahan, which housed centrifuge manufacturing and other nuclear infrastructure. The United States, citing the defense of Israel and the need to prevent an Iranian nuclear breakthrough, joined the operation. American B-2 bombers, flying from Missouri, dropped bunker-busting munitions on Fordo, while submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles struck other targets. It was the first time since 1979 that American forces had directly attacked facilities inside Iran. President Trump hailed the operation as a spectacular military success that had completely obliterated Iran's nuclear program. Iran responded within days, launching ballistic missiles at the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, a major American facility. A brief but intense war, the 12-day war, ensued, ending with a Qatari-brokered ceasefire on June 24th. But the damage was done. Iran's nuclear facilities lay in ruins, and its program had been set back years. Yet the regime remained in power, and its determination to resist American pressure had only deepened. 6 months after the war, Iran exploded. In late December 2025, protests over economic hardship, spiraling inflation, chronic unemployment, shortages of basic goods erupted in Tehran and quickly spread to cities across the country. The demonstrations were larger and more confrontational than any since the 2009 Green Movement. Protesters chanted against the regime itself, calling for the downfall of the supreme leader. Some carried the pre-revolutionary lion and sun flag, a symbol of the monarchy. The government responded with overwhelming force. Security forces fired live ammunition into crowds. Thousands were arrested. The internet was shut down across large parts of the country to prevent organization and to limit the flow of images to the outside world. Human rights groups documented shocking death tolls. The U.S.-based IRANA reported more than 7,000 killed by late February 2026, with thousands more detained. The Iranian government acknowledged more than 3,000 deaths, but blamed terrorist acts orchestrated by the United States and Israel. For the Trump administration, the protests were an opportunity. On January 13, 2026, President Trump addressed the Iranian people directly. Keep protesting. Help is on the way. As protests raged inside Iran, the United States built up its military forces in the region. The Lincoln Carrier Strike Group deployed to the Arabian Sea. Additional squadrons of fighter aircraft arrived at bases in Qatar, the UAE, and Kuwait. The administration described the buildup as defensive, intended to protect American personnel and assets from possible Iranian retaliation. But the scale was unmistakable, the largest American military deployment in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Inside the administration, debate reportedly raged between those who favored renewed diplomacy and those who saw the protests as a chance to finally achieve regime change. Trump, ever drawn to dramatic action, seemed to lean toward the latter. In late January, he issued a new warning: Iran must accept a nuclear deal, and quickly, or face consequences. He did not specify what those consequences would be, but the military buildup gave his words weight. In Tehran, the regime faced a desperate calculus: concede to American demands and risk appearing weak, or hold firm and risk war. Despite the threats, diplomacy continued. In February 2026, with Omani mediation, American and Iranian negotiators held 3 rounds of indirect talks in Geneva. The discussions focused narrowly on the nuclear file, with both sides agreeing to set aside, for the moment, the even more contentious issues of ballistic missiles and regional proxies. The negotiations were intense, each session lasting several hours. Iran's delegation reportedly offered significant compromises, reducing enrichment to as low as 1.5%, pausing enrichment for a period of years, or placing its program under an international consortium. But the American position was maximalist. According to U.S. officials cited in the Wall Street Journal, Washington demanded that Iran dismantle its 3 main nuclear facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. It also demanded that Iran transfer its entire remaining stockpile of enriched uranium, estimated at around 10,000 kilograms, to the United States. Any agreement, the U.S. insisted, must be permanent, with no expiration date. On sanctions relief, the offer was minimal only, limited upfront relief, with more contingent on sustained compliance over time. The talks concluded on February 26th without agreement. Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, told reporters that Washington must abandon its excessive demands if it hopes to secure a deal. He did not specify which terms he meant, but the outlines were clear. For Iran, accepting the American proposal would mean effectively surrendering its nuclear program entirely. It would mean dismantling facilities it had spent decades building, handing over material it insisted was its sovereign right to possess. It would mean accepting a permanent prohibition on enrichment, a requirement that went far beyond the temporary limits of the original JCPOA, and it would mean trusting that the United States would deliver sanctions relief trust that had been betrayed once already. The Islamic Republic will not negotiate its right to peaceful nuclear enrichment, Araghchi stated. That right is inalienable. For the Trump administration, zero enrichment was the only acceptable outcome. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told reporters that Iran's insistence on preserving its missile program was a big problem. The positions were irreconcilable. On the morning of February 28, 2026, the first day of Iran's working week, the missiles came. The United States and Israel launched a coordinated military campaign against Iran, described by President Trump as major combat operations. In a video message, Trump warned that bombs will be dropping everywhere and told the Iranian people that the hour of your freedom is at hand. Stay sheltered. When we are finished, take over your government. The strikes targeted military facilities, air defense systems, and leadership nodes. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps confirmed attacks on U.S. assets across the Gulf region. They claimed to have struck the headquarters of the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, a radar system in Qatar, and a combat support vessel in regional waters. Huge plumes of black smoke rose above Manama. Explosions were reported in Kuwait, the UAE, and Qatar, all host to American military bases. Iran's retaliation was immediate and regional in scope. The conflict had expanded far beyond the nuclear issue. far beyond even the long shadow war between the two nations. It was now an open, multi-front war. As the strikes continued, the world held its breath over the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway, just 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, is the most important energy choke point on Earth. Nearly 1/5 of the world's oil production, about 20 million barrels per day, passes through it. Iran has long threatened to close the strait in response to attack, and with war now raging, that threat moved from rhetoric to real possibility. Any sustained disruption would send oil prices skyrocketing, with cascading effects on the global economy. Inflation, already a concern in many countries, would surge. Central banks would face agonizing choices about interest rates. The shipping industry would be upended. Analysts warned that even a partial closure would have severe inflationary effects worldwide. Iran's Houthi allies had already demonstrated the vulnerability of Red Sea shipping. The strait was an even more critical artery. As American and Israeli warplanes struck Iranian targets, the question was not whether Iran would retaliate, but whether it would choose the option that hurt not just its enemies, but the entire global economy. The Arab states of the Persian Gulf watched the escalation with profound alarm. For years, they had balanced between their security relationship with the United States and their geographic reality as neighbors of Iran. The war now threatened to shatter that balance. Qatar, which hosts the massive Al Udeid Air Base home to U.S. Central Command's forward headquarters, found itself directly in the line of fire when Iran claimed to have struck a U.S. radar system there. Bahrain, host to the Fifth Fleet, saw smoke rising above its capital. The UAE, a commercial hub and regional power, reported casualties from missile attacks in Abu Dhabi. Behind the scenes, Gulf diplomats worked frantically to de-escalate. Oman, which had mediated the failed Geneva talks, remained in contact with both sides. Qatar, despite being targeted, sought channels to reduce tensions. Saudi Arabia, which had only recently restored diplomatic relations with Iran under Chinese mediation, faced the nightmare of being caught between its American ally and its newly reconciled neighbor. The Gulf Cooperation Council convened emergency meetings, but its members had little power to stop a war between two powers determined to fight. Behind the scenes of the military campaign, a quieter but equally critical battle was being waged over logistics. The magazine-depth military jargon for the stockpiles of available munitions of American and Israeli forces faced unprecedented strain. During the 12-day war in June 2025, the U.S. and Israel had burned through interceptor missiles at a rate that alarmed military planners. They-aid batteries, Patriot systems, and naval interceptors had been expended in large numbers to defend against Iranian missile barrages. Replenishing those stocks would take time and money. The SM-3 interceptor, for example, cost nearly $40 million per missile, and the Navy would procure only 12 in the entire fiscal year. In a prolonged conflict, the United States might face hard choices about where to deploy its limited defensive assets. A regional military official told the Financial Times that the U.S. could easily expend a whole year's worth of critical defensive munitions in just 1 or 2 days of intense operations. The war planners had to calculate not only how to strike Iran, but how to protect American forces and allies from the inevitable retaliation with limited resources stretched across multiple theaters. As this documentary is completed in early March 2026, the war between the United States and Iran continues. Its outcome is uncertain. Its consequences will shape the Middle East for decades. The Iranian regime, battered by sanctions, shaken by protests, and now subjected to direct military attack, faces the greatest challenge to its survival since the chaos of the 1980s. But Iran is not Libya, not Iraq, not Venezuela. It is a nation of more than 90 million people with a sophisticated military, a network of regional proxies, and a population whose response to foreign attack is unpredictable. History offers warnings. American interventions in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya have left trails of blood and chaos, rarely achieving their stated objectives. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, is unlikely to surrender. In his calculus, capitulation to the Great Satan would be a greater threat to the regime's survival than war. The protests that erupted in December showed deep discontent with the government, but foreign attack has a way of rallying populations to their rulers. No one can say whether the Iranian people, given Trump's invitation to take over your government, will heed his call or close ranks against the foreign invader. The only certainty is that the long conflict between Iran and the United States, rooted in a coup 73 years ago and sustained by decades of mutual grievance and miscalculation, has entered its most dangerous chapter yet.